Good afternoon, it's Gary Sly, and it's the Legacy of Handmade Objects. As you can see, I want to do some work on some cross stitch today rather than have you look at my big old pumpkin head. Give a few little introductory remarks, and then I'll see what I can do to get some stitching done and be able to talk at the same time. It's November the 11th and it's Veterans Day, so certainly we want to remember those who lost their lives for the security of our country and honor those who have sacrificed on our behalf. My youngest son was in the Army and still works in some of the same fields that he dealt with when he was in active service. So I think about him. My father and uncles were all in the military, and some of them were in Vietnam at the same time, and then my maternal grandfather served in World War II and was in the Battle of the Bulge. So conscious of them and all those kind of behind the scenes moms and mothers and all the rest to help make our country a more secure place. As I mentioned, I've been working on some pretty detailed cross stitch, and I thought it might be just kind of fun to look at it a little bit. I'm going to show you first the pattern and talk about that for a minute. It's called Majestic Lace. My friend Arlene Cohen at Works by ABC is the one that designed this. I have mentioned to you before that I love stitching architectural designs and I love geometrics, and certainly this ticks off the box of geometrics and kind of fine detail. It does look very much like a lace doily. She has it done on a purple fabric, and I'm using a really dark purple fabric here. This is a Weeks Dye Works color 32 count, and I'm doing it over 2, which means that I'm each X is over 2 stitches in each direction, if that's not obvious to some of you. There's a couple challenges here. Of course, using small count linen has its own challenges. I'm lucky that for the most part I've been able to continue to do this kind of work by just taking my glasses off. I've always been nearsighted, need my glasses for driving and that sort of thing, but as I've gotten older, I find if I just take them off, I can see just fine up close. The other challenge with a pattern like this is when you're using dark color fabric. It's always a bit of a challenge to see the holes, so you really have to concentrate. But I'm finding the more I go along with this, the more I'm able to kind of estimate, even just by taking a look at what the final stitch looks like, whether I've hit the right mark or not. I find that when I'm using linen, the slugs and the unevenness of the fabric can kind of throw me off a little bit until I get used to it. But I really have gotten a feel for this fabric now, and it's pretty easy for me to see where I need to be going. I think for me the biggest error is always making my stitches too large. And there are some mistakes here. If I were to hold it still for a while and you were able to focus in, you might see that in some of the earlier stitches in the very beginning where I started, that I might have gone over 3. The nice thing about the way Arlene has designed this pattern is that there are spaces in between. And so even if my spaces are not perfectly lined up the way I would like them to be, it's pretty hard to tell that. And I would think that if one were making lace in one of the more traditional manners, tatting or needle lace or even bobbin lace, that there would be inaccuracies and imperfections there as well. So I'm not too stressed about that part of it as long as it looks nice. There are times when I'm doing cross stitch that I'm pretty fussy about whether everything lines up just perfect or not. But I find that with a piece like this, I'm not going to be able to be quite that particular. I don't usually like using a hoop or frame. I like stitching in hand. I find it much easier for me to handle. But I found early on with this linen that if I didn't use my snap frames, that I couldn't keep it taut enough to be able to tell where the holes were. So that's why I've kind of given in here. I am using snap frames for this one. As a framer, I've told you many times before, I dislike hoops intensely because they do tend to leave marks that are very hard to get rid of. Now see, there's one, there's a good example. I've already gone one thread too far with that stitch. So I'm gonna have to back off and just go over 2 instead of going over 3. Yes, you'll have to see that this is an unedited version where I'm okay with making mistakes and trying to thread my needle while I'm talking and all the rest of that. I'll let you all be the judge of whether I'm really even pulling this off by able to talk and stitch at the same time. I don't know that I would call myself particularly athletic or coordinated, so maybe stitching is one of those places where I can show off a little bit more coordination than what I might have normally. I really love intricate, very involved designs. You've seen perhaps some of my discussion of full coverage pieces in the past and how much fun it is for me to do that sort of intense work. I'm finding with this piece, because it is very detailed and because finding the exact place to put my stitches is pretty difficult, that I do better at this first thing in the morning. I'm not really great at handling this at the end of the day when I'm really tired. I find it's better to have another kind of project then, which speaks to this whole idea of whether you've got more than one thing happening at the same time. Knowing a lot about emotions and spirituality and those sort of things because of my background as a pastor and as a counselor, I would say that if you're putting negative energy into something, if you're doing something you don't like, or if you're forcing yourself to do it using a deadline or under circumstances that make you uncomfortable, you really are putting negative energy into the work itself. And I guess probably many times we can get away with that. Nobody else would notice. But my suspicion is that we're much more likely to make mistakes. We're much more likely to miscount and really physically do things that make our work less pleasing if we're not comfortable and happy in what we're doing. I love the analogy that a former customer had when she was talking about cross stitch, when she's really in the groove and when she really loves what she's working on and everything seems to be coming together nicely. She feels like that little girl that used to go out in the backyard and play all by herself. And she could imagine pretty much anything in that setting because there was no other distraction to keep her from completely going into the little world of her own. For me, that's kind of what happens with stitching. It's kind of ironic that I'm even able to talk and stitch at the same time. Sometimes when my thoughts are really negative, if I can sit down and stitch a little bit, I'll find that the world brightens up a bit. I hope that if stitching is not that for you, that you do find some sort of a handmade project that will allow you to have that same feeling. That's why I talk about the legacy of handmade objects, not just cross stitch or needlepoint or one of those things. I think my theory is that for everybody, there's some sort of handmade, hand manipulated, hand baked, perhaps if cooking is your thing, that gives you a sense of that kind of pleasure and satisfaction and allows you to relax and kind of put aside the troubles of the world. I'm playing around with my pattern here a little bit so I don't get messed up. Just got a few more stitches on this side and then I will be I've just got one more of the long spikes on the side and one more of the little leaf sections, and then I will have finished the central motif for this design. This has full stitches in the center medallion, and the leaves have some half stitch areas that make it look yet a little more lacy even than it does to begin with. If you have trouble seeing your threads with dark fabric, there are a couple of solutions to that. I'm using a pretty intense light here from the front. That kind of helps me. You can put a light behind it so the light will shine through the threads. Sometimes that gives you a little bit of a help. And I'm working on a flat white surface here, which if I were holding it down towards the table rather than up so that you can see it on the camera, that would also help me to be able to see the holes in between. That's really the issue here, is being able to figure out where to put your needle. And as I say, as I've done this enough, I usually can kind of estimate where it's going to go almost by feel, though it is helpful, of course, to see the hole. I think I mentioned, but what I found with this is that my final stitch almost always ends up looking just a little bit smaller than I imagined it would. But that's okay. It's a composite look, and the combination of the stitches, of course, is what we're most interested in here. Now, I will say that as I'm doing this and talking at the same time, I'm making a few little minor mistakes. Some of these corners are a little wider than they should be, and if I can make it up with the next stitch so that it doesn't look bad, I'll be okay. If not, you won't know it, but I'll probably go back in and change a few of these and frog out some stuff just to make sure. I would not say that I'm a perfectionist, but I hate looking at something that I know is an error when I know that I can go in and fix it. So yeah, see that last one there, that's gone down just a little bit too far, so I'm just going to go and pull that out. Doesn't look like it's going to be fixed with the next stitch that comes along, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that one out now and make sure it goes in the right place. And here I'm going to thread my needle again. The table's not looking too terrible today. We have some returns. Got to get back in the mail, and my wonderful old quilt there is at the end of the table. I haven't got back to doing any quilting yet, but I've decided I'm going to take that to the new place and get serious about it. So let me just do a few more stitches here. I'm almost through with this section. See, I could feel when I hit the hole that time, so that makes a whole lot more sense. If I were really concentrating and not talking at the same time, I'd be much more likely to do this correctly with each one. But you all know about that too. I wonder how some of you all decide what you take when you go to stitch in a group. I've heard members tell me that they don't like going and stitching with other people because they start talking, and that's when they mess up. I think for me, I probably would not take something like this that would require really intense attention, and I probably wouldn't take full coverage pieces, mostly from that perspective, because you have to take so much stuff with you when you're working on those. So probably if I were stitching in public or sitting around a table with a group, I might be more likely to choose simpler projects rather than these more complex ones, so that I could pay more attention. Wonder what you would do. Well, I'm going to finish this row. I've got 2 more stitches here, and then let's see, glance over here, I've got 3 more stitches after that. I use one of my kids' old music stands as a base for what I do, to put my pattern on. That way it's always up and easy to see. You know, I'm gonna have to pull that one out, and I don't want to do that again. So I'm gonna stop for now. That's a little bit of a kind of a meditative practice today, trying to kind of talk about what stitching does and how it can be very comforting and sustaining. I think I'll end there, and I'm going to go fix that last stitch that I seem to have crossed over too quickly. And I'm going to end for today. Thank you for tuning in. This is Gary Sly, and this has been the Legacy of Handmade Objects.